Welcome back to our series on the history of the mint julep. My name is Brian Cushing. I'm the program director at Locust Grove, and so I've strung you along now for 2 whole videos about mint juleps without using one single drop of bourbon, so I figured it would be cruel not to fix that. Lucky for us, we're still in the 1840s, but Henry Clay, the great compromiser himself, actually wrote down his mint julep recipe in his journal, which he did base in bourbon, unlike most of the other recipes of the time. The first recorded instances that we have of Kentucky whiskey being referred to as bourbon was in the 1820s. So by now in the 1840s, we're well into the period of bourbon being recognized as its own form of whiskey, having evolved over decades of settlement in Kentucky from the prevailing crops and distilling and aging practices. We are more than a century, though, before what makes bourbon bourbon was codified into law. So in the 1840s, you had an idea of what bourbon was culturally, but it wasn't a legal definition like we have today. Also, in those days, you wouldn't have been going and buying a bottle of bourbon. You would have been going and having either your jug like this one, our friends over at J. Henderson Artifacts make these wonderful reproductions, or a glass flask like this filled from a barrel of bourbon. Here's everything that you're going to need to make this mint julep, and it's all the familiar ingredients that we think of today. First of all, you will need some bourbon. Now, we might never know what the bourbon that Henry Clay was drinking tasted exactly like, but this is my favorite for mint juleps. This is Old Bardstown from the Willet Distilling Company. You can use whatever bourbon is your favorite for this application. You'll need some sugar, some mint, chilled water, which is not usually what we do in these cocktails, and that may become apparent in a moment. And Mr. Clay called for a coin silver goblet. All right, now I'm not the most well-off Victorian, so we're going to go with the silver plate and just use a regular silver-plated julep cup. It'll get the same job done. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove a number of leaves from one stalk. And we are going to use a silver spoon to just press those leaves against the inside of the cup. Mr. Clay said to bruise and remove, so we're going to give those a good bruising in there and put them back on our plate here. Next, he says to half fill the goblet with cracked ice. I'm actually going to go 3/4 of the way up. Next, we pour a jigger of bourbon. Again, we're going with Old Bardstown 100 proof over the cracked ice, and we're going to call a jigger 2 ounces. Just pour that over the ice. If you've got no measuring equipment at home, that's 4 tablespoons. The next part is different from everything I have ever said on this channel to do at this step, but it's going to make a difference. Usually we mix sugar in warm water so it dissolves really well. He has you using sugar. I'm going to use a teaspoon and mixing that with cold water. And I'm just going to eyeball that until it looks like enough for it to kind of mix in. So it's difficult for sugar to dissolve in cold water, and you're probably not going to get it there. So what I'm going to say to do is to keep it moving and then pour it over the bourbon. And as the frost starts to gather on the side of the cup, he says as the moisture starts to gather, then to garnish it with some sprigs of mint. And remember, always a good idea to work those between your hands to really get that scent moving. There's your mint. A straw. Always clip it off, so whoever's drinking it, their nose is right in the mint there. And there is Mr. Henry Clay's mint julep. this is possibly the first recorded instance of bourbon being the basis for a mint julep, and it's got all the elements that we think of. If you watch the first video in this series where I mixed a classic julep as we think of in the 20th century, this is a little bit different. It goes together a little bit different. So let's see how we did. Oh wow. That really satisfies. The fact that the sugar was not actually fully dissolved makes a big difference in this, as it's all just kind of dripping down and combining through the ice. And maybe it's the fact that it's not all perfectly combined it's just what makes you pick up every single element of this particular julep. So I would say that I've learned a lot. This is definitely, nobody can dispute this as being a mint julep. It's exactly like what we think of them today. And I've got to hand it to Mr. Clay. I'm glad his wisdom has come down to us through the ages in this respect. And hope you try it at home. Let us know what you think, and we will be back with you. We have several more really exciting, really interesting recipes for the mint julep to come. So thanks for hanging in there with us. Looking forward to seeing you back on site whenever that's possible, and here's to you, friends.